Hi, everyone. I'm Dan Murphy, chiropractor. This is my 45th year as a chiropractor. I went to Western States up in Portland, Oregon. I've been faculty for over 40 years at Life Chiropractic College West. I do one class, 2 seniors, and it's basically in clinical management, even though it dovetails around an interactive drawing class. I think it's the greatest thing I've ever come up with in my 45-year career. And today we get, and I'm board certified in orthopedics. So I have an orthopedic bias to my clinical approach, which I think should become clear as I do this short presentation with you today. I have a co-teacher. His name is Steve Shanks, and he is not a healthcare provider. He is an engineer type and the owner of the company called Erchonia Medical Lasers. And he will actually launch today's brief webinar. So please welcome Steve Shanks. Steve, I'm turning it over to you.
Okay, thanks, Dan. Good afternoon, everybody. Appreciate you taking your time out to listen to this presentation. We're introducing this week a laser that we just got FDA cleared, the GVL, using a green-violet laser. This is something different for us, something new. This is what the 510K statement is. If you look at the date of this, September 1st, 2022, that's when the FDA cleared this device for the indication that's on the screen. Give you a little bit of an idea, like as I go through this, that hopefully you'll get an idea, okay, why do we start coming up with these different wavelengths, these different indications? Why do we keep going shorter wavelengths instead of longer when everybody else keeps going longer and more power? So hopefully by the time you get to the end of this, you'll kind of understand why we decided to come up with this new laser. Again, I'd like to thank Dr. Kirk Gare, Dr. Robert Silverman, and the late Albert Comey for helping us with this clinical trial. We do not introduce new products unless they have clinical research. They've gone through the FDA. This particular process has taken us about 4 years to get here. There's a lot of confusion in the market. If you don't have a laser that has any research behind it and you're selling a heating device, you're going to say more power is better. Longer wavelengths penetrate deeper. There's two classes of laser with the FDA: photochemical, which is visible, which is non-heating. So we were the first one to get one through the FDA in 2002. We had to do 2 blinded and controlled clinical trials. There's photophysical, which is infrared, which is heat. They're substantial equivalents to heating pads, which were grandfathered into the FDA in 1976. As of this date, there are no heating lasers that have ever submitted to the FDA to get a new indication. So they're all approved for the same thing: topical heating and muscle relaxation. Biochemical, I'm going to get into that a little bit, kind of like how drugs work. So if you can look at photochemical, photophysical, and biochemical, that's kind of what this presentation is going to be about. And I'm ended up with the research that we're doing. So why a green-violet laser? Only visible lasers create photochemistry. This is extremely well published. Infrared lasers absorbed by water. As the water starts vibrating, it starts creating heat. So there are 2 different mechanisms. The reason why you don't see Erchonia get into biomodulation, because there's so many different ways that these devices work. And the only real credible research, in my opinion, is visible lasers. We're here at Erchonia, we can manufacture anything that we want. Early on, we kind of played around with infrared lasers, but we didn't really see much. So if you're looking at a laser or you're on anybody's website, everybody's going to tell you that they stimulate cytochrome C oxidase. It's kind of like the golden term that everybody likes to use. If you look up the top left chart, you're going to see the absorption of complex 4, and you're going to see it's got a peak of about 630 nanometers. So, and if you look at infrared, it doesn't stimulate complex 4 very well. So then, okay, what is complex 4? There are 5 complexes in your electron transport chain. Complex 4 is right before complex 5. So no one ever wants to talk about complex 1, complex 2, and complex 3, which if you're just going to stimulate the end of the complex, you haven't touched the other 3, you're probably not going to look at a clinical benefit, which is one of the reasons why we came up with this laser. And if, again, if you look at 800, 900, and 1,000 nanometers, those stimulate complex 4. As you can see, it's quite a bit less than red laser, but they do it as the tissue starts to heat up. So what we've been teaching for the last few years is to start looking at the electron volts, or how lasers work. They work through energy. If you see violet, it has 3.1 electron volts, green 2.4, red 1.9. To create a photochemical effect, you need at least 1.7 electron volts. So this is irrelevant of power. If I turn the power up on my laser, all I'm doing is throwing more photons. If they don't have any energy, they're a low photon infrared laser. You cannot change the electron volts in the laser by throwing on more power. All you're doing is heating up the tissue faster. So they work completely different. So visible laser energy fuels the mitochondria. So most of the stuff that we're going to talk about today is the mitochondria, which is some of the things you're going to see a lot of Erchonia going forward. Hopefully by the end of this, you'll see where we're going to take this research in the future. So this is the most energetic laser in the world. I just showed you the last chart. The violet laser puts out 3 electron volts. The green laser puts out 2.4 electron volts. So great, what's that mean? We'll kind of get into that. Mitochondria create more than about 90% of the ATP in your cells. I think it's 34. Your mitochondria create about 34 through the electron transport chain, and the Krebs cycle creates 2. So what we really want to do is figure out, okay, how can we get more energy to the mitochondria through the electron transport chain to fuel the ATP so we can start getting good clinical outcomes. So again, where does the AT in the mitochondria? It's the electron transport chain. So this is something that we kind of put together to kind of show you the different wavelengths that affect the different stages of the electron transport chain. So you can see violet blue laser affects complex 1 and 2. Complex 3 is affected by green light, and complex 4 is affected by red light. I would doubt very seriously if many people have seen this or put this together, but this is kind of where we're looking at taking our technology in the future, which is, you know, if you look at that September 1st 510K for this, we started this project about 4 years ago. So each one of these clinical trials, if you're doing clinical data, takes anywhere from 3 to 5 years to get through the FDA. So again, as you have high energy and you start stepping energy down to complex 4, the electrons send the electron transport chain sends its energy to complex 5, which then creates ATP. Loss of mitochondria complex activity. Loss of mitochondria results in a lack of pumping electrons and protons efficacy in its specific complex. Loss of the complex activity has been documented to be a contributor of most all diseases. Examples of loss of mitochondrial complexes 1 through 4 activity. Osteoarthritis. So as you can see, complex 1, complex 2, and complex 3 are all dysfunctional. And we're going to get into what happens when you have dysfunctional mitochondria in the future. Heart and muscle. Complex 1 significantly decreased. Skeletal muscle of aged rats. Decrease being 42% in heart, 43% skeletal muscle. Decrease in heart is 32%, 20% in skeletal muscle for complex 3. So you can see with one laser, we can affect the heart, the muscle, by using complex 1 and 3, which just happen to be violet and green laser. So you'll probably notice some of the colors. These correlate to the particular wavelengths that we're using. Mitochondria and aging. Complex 1 is the central role in the regulation of longevity. So you can see more and more, we're learning more and more about these complexes. If you want to go on PubMed, you put in electron transport chain, you're just going to come up with thousands of articles. So we're just pulling out a couple. We've known this for 3 or 4 years, but we're just introducing it now. Once we have the laser FDA cleared, and we can start introducing it to the market. Obesity, complex 1 and 4 is affected by obesity. We also know complex 3 has to be in this particular study. They didn't look at it. How do we know that? Because complex 3, green laser, we've already done 3 studies on obesity, which we're doing our 4th study at the Mayo Clinic up in Rochester. Autism, frontal cortex, and this is one of the greatest studies I've seen. So these are all post-mortem studies. The frontal cortex, or low levels of electron transport chain complexes, was observed in a subset of autism cases. 3 of 5 for complexes 1, 2, and 4, and 40% for 2 of 5 for complexes 3 and 4. So we do not have a 510K for autism. We're meeting with the FDA on March 1st. Hopefully we'll start sometime in April, but you could kind of see if if I'm going to use an infrared laser and I'm not affecting complexes 1 through 4, what kind of clinical result am I going to get? In the past, we've just used red laser. Red laser only affects complex 4. So complex 1, 2, and 3 are not affected. So as we're looking at doing clinical research going in the future, now that we know how each wavelength affects the different complexes, we're going to start adding this to some of our protocols. Mitochondrial dysfunction in the blood-brain barrier. Again, this is all complex 1. You know, and you're going to kind of see as we start walking through this, what some of the pharmaceutical interventions are dealing to all these complexes. Neurodegenerative diseases. This is an absolutely fantastic study. That AD right there, this is a well-published paper. You can see Alzheimer's disease affects complex 1, complex 3, complex 4, Parkinson's disease, complex 1, complex 4, Huntington's disease, complex 2, 3, 4, and ALS is, you know, complex 1, 2, and 4. So as we're looking at these things, we can have a better idea how to treat these specific diseases. This is one of the reasons why we've never really bought into this power and depth of penetration. To me, those are marketing claims. If you have power and depth of penetration with no clinical outcome and it hasn't been proved in a blinded controlled clinical trial, in my opinion, that's what marketing is. So effective the pharmaceutical drugs. So we talked about photophysical, we talked about photochemistry. This is biochemistry. So this is how pharmacy works. Mitochondria toxicity based. Anybody can pull this up. This is an absolutely fantastic resource. There's 4,100 drugs that are mitochondria toxic. So if you kind of read some of this stuff, it's basically talking about, okay, they're not really targeted. It just happens to be a bad side effect. So we get side effects from drugs, and we all know that our patients are taking this stuff, or your patients are taking this. So whether you know it or not, they're shutting off these different complexes. So as you're treating a patient, you probably need to start looking at, okay, what's the root cause of this problem? And again, NSAIDs, which everybody's aspirin, shuts off complex 1. This is one of the, one of my favorite studies that's out there. This is a study that was on Tylenol. This is a lawsuit. It's been across the country. It's a class action lawsuit. And the mom's taking Tylenol. So think about this. The mom is taking Tylenol. She's shutting off complex 1. Way back when they started saying, well, autism is a genetic disease. So really what's happening is by the mom taking complex 1, screwing up the mitochondria DNA, it's getting transferred to the child. So these kids are coming out with autism. So you can see by the time the children were an average age of 8.9 years, 25.8 had been diagnosed with ADHD only, 6 with ASD only, and 4.2 with ADHD and Alzheimer's disease. So this is something that we just pulled up also, but this is an old study, mitochondria medicine, pharmacological targeting of mitochondria and disease. So now pharmacy is going back in and targeting mitochondria. Why would they do that? Well, if I want to shut up inflammation in the body, I can start shutting off the electron transport chain so it can't produce inflammation. Unfortunately, when you do that, inflammation is part of the healing process. So the vicious circle of mitochondria dysfunction. Unlike other organelles, mitochondria contain their own DNA or mitochondria DNA and must either be tolerated or corrected to preserve mitochondrial function. Importantly, replication of damaged mitochondria DNA can lead to stalling and introduction of mutations or genetic loss. Dysfunctional mitochondria survive longer than healthy mitochondria. In this way, some types of dysfunctional mitochondria build up and eventually become more common than healthy ones. I'm not saying this is the reason why we have all these brain diseases now, but as many drugs are out there, you can kind of see how they're starting to affect all the electron transport chain. Photochemistry. Photochemistry is how low-level lasers work, and it's only in a visible range. A lot of people are coming out and saying LEDs work the same. We've been doing research with low-level lasers and using LEDs as placebo devices since 1998. In my opinion, they're not coherent. They do not work. Maybe that's what our placebo effect is, but it's about 10 times less than what an actual low-level laser is. So each wavelength is absorbed by the electron transport chain, producing a unique photochemical effect depending on the state of the cell. So there's a lot of research out there saying if you treat a healthy cell, it doesn't matter which wavelength that you use, it's not going to get absorbed. It's just going to keep passing that electron volt or that energy on. So this is a study we did at the University of Illinois, Chicago. So we looked at 3 different wavelengths. So you're going to see on the top where it says mitochondrial activity, proliferation, production of IL-10. We did 405 and 532 on all those, just like apoptosis. We did all 3 and 532. Each wavelength has a different effect and it has a different benefit. It depends on the energy state of the cell. Green wavelength, I already showed you what red was, the peak absorption. So you're going to see this is the peak absorption of green, which affects complex 3. Bone healing, again, bone healing is complex 3, production of BS facilitates bone repair. Again, 532 nanometer green laser led to a significant increase of mitochondrial transmembrane potential of 13%. Changes in mitochondrial transmembrane potential are integral to cell life and to normal cell function, is essential for ATP synthesis. So if you have 4 complexes that you're going to treat, 1, 2, 3, and 4, and you're only treating 1 or 2, if you have dysfunction at 1, you're going to have some dysfunction in electron transport chain. So this is why we kind of came up with this green violet laser, so we could treat complex 1, complex 2, and then complex 4 with the red laser, which I kind of goes over through some of the research which we proved. Again, 425 nanometer, 540 nanometer wavelengths were more effective in stimulating osteoblasts compared to 660 nanometers and 810 nanometers. Why is this? Again, you cannot create photochemistry with 660 or 810 nanometers. Basically, all you're doing is getting absorbed by water and heating the cell, and you're affecting a limited amount of complex 4. Peripheral nerves, they look at 532, 540, and 904 nanometers on peripheral nervous system. Only the red and green light had an effect on compound action potential of nerve, with green light much more effective than the red light. Why? You have a damaged nerve. Again, we're going to give it more energy. Unfortunately, this did not look, they did not look at 405 nanometers, but back then there was no 405 nanometer lasers on the market, which is probably why they didn't look at it. Injured nerves, again, 540 nanometers was more effective than 632. Again, a lot of this stuff you're not going to see out in the trade unless you come to listen to like Dan or some of the other lectures for Erchonia that are pushing this stuff. So this is a picture from a doctor that he's an obesity doctor in St. Pete, Florida. So this patient has dermatitis on the left. He treated this patient for 2 weeks with a green laser. He has no idea what he's doing. He just kind of said, look, I'm going to treat this patient. I'm going to see what I'm going to get. We do not have a 510K. This is just for educational purposes. So this is a hypoxic state. There's no, the oxygen concentration in this leg is horrible. Hypoxia, complex 3 regulates hypoxia. Is this the reason why he's seen some of those results? Probably, but it would have been probably better if he'd have treated complex 1, complex 4 also. But in that case, it's a nice result. So again, violet laser, peak absorption of violet laser. If you look what's highlighted in yellow, you'll see this, it's with 3 electron volts. This study is not about electron volts, which Erchonia tries to teach, but 3 electron volts is violet laser. So we're kind of showing the peak absorption. Again, only 405 nano laser inhibited secretion of IL-6. Again, more evaluated light mediated release of nitric oxide from Cox using 447 nanometers, 532, 635, and 808. Exposure to 477 blue led to significantly higher increase of nitric oxide. Again, so we really want to start looking at these, these different mechanisms that as we go through this. Again, muscle fibers, documented that irradiation with 400 nanometer violet laser increased maximal respiratory rates, 53% myotubes, which are skeletal muscle fibers. Here's another one. I mean, I could go on with this all day long. Investigated effects of 405, 664, and 805 nanometers on reactive oxygen species. ROS considered to be secondary messengers. Again, this is complex 1. So neck and shoulder studies. So I'm going to finalize up. So what we did is we went back and compared our neck and shoulder studies. So we got our first neck and shoulder study done in 2002. And then 2000, I think it was 15 or 16, we did red violet. And then as you could see, just on September 1st, we did green violet. So this is a comparison of the clinical trials. So I didn't put the placebo in here. because at this point, I don't know if it makes a difference. The placebo effect was about 23%, which isn't bad. So again, pain duration with red laser, 61 months, red violet, 76 months, green violet, 89 months. So duration. So this is how long these patients had chronic pain, chronic neck and shoulder pain. Subjects meeting success criteria, 65% in red, 75% red violet, and 81% in green violet. Improved range of motion, 48%, 45%, and 52%. So again, 43%, this is post 48 hours. So you can see the pain came back a little bit when we're just treating complex 4 with a red laser, more complete complex 1, 2, and 4 with a red violet laser. It got a little bit better, about 5%, but you can look at when we're doing green violet, as we're adding more energy to the system, we're treating complex 1, complex 2, and complex 3. We're getting another 20% reduction in pain and range of motion. So this is kind of what you're going to see from Erchonia going forward. Patient satisfaction, the accelerate was 89%, the EVR was 89%, the GVL had 98%. So all this just backs up the data. These are all secondary measures to basically back up our pain data that we submit to the FDA. So range of motion, you can see the range of motion with the accelerate, the EVRL, GVL. The nice part about this clinical trial is these 3 clinical trials is the exact same protocol on each patient. Nothing was changed. Everywhere we lasered with the accelerate, the EVRL, and GVL, we lasered them exactly the same patient population. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dan.
So hello, everyone. And in the switcheroo here, just takes a moment for my presentation to come up. And okay, it's up. So as I listened to Steve Shanks, we did not corroborate at all prior to this webinar. He did call me last night to remind me that we're doing this. My presentation is 73 pages long, and we'll have to skip through some of it just because of time. My presentation is not PowerPoint. It is a 73-page PDF. And I talked with Adriana from Erchonia, and I said, hey, Adriana, if I send you my presentation, and if anybody wants it, can they get it? And she said, absolutely. So I will send this up after class today to Adriana, so that anybody that wants exact copies of my PDFs, you're welcome to it. I would also tell you that when I do talk to Steve Shanks, the owner of Erchonia, a lot of times I believe that he makes assumptions that you understand what he is talking about. For example, when he starts running through things like interleukin 6 and interleukin 10, these are, in my perception, probably because I'm at a chiropractic college, and yet my class are seniors, they graduate after me, that a lot of times those concepts are somewhat foggy in the minds of most providers, including chiropractors, not understanding actually who's on webinar today. But I would tell all of you that want to know more and to be the best, that the single best reference that I have read to help my understanding of cytokines, which is interleukin 6 and interleukin 10, and some of their difference and relevance and importance, and how critical it is to understand that you can turn them up and down with certain waveforms of the electromagnetic spectrum. The absolute best reference is this one. It's titled Younger Next Year by Chris Crawley and Henry Lodge. It's a book that I think everyone should read anyway, but just if you read it just because you're into longevity and health, you'll get the best education about cytokines, specifically pro-inflammatory versus anti-inflammatory cytokines, which puts the information that Steve Shanks just shared with us into an incredible different perspective. Because those interleukins, because of COVID-19 and the terminology, the cytokine storm of COVID-19, that this type of information is really more critical than ever. And the newest immunological textbooks, like this 2023 by Lauren Sampeyrak out of the University of Colorado at Boulder, has an incredibly awesome section on COVID and cytokines. Once you get a feel for what these molecules are and how we can influence them, all of a sudden everything changes, because as Steve Shanks was sort of saying, that there is a pharmacological interest in this with horrible side effects, yet we can do it non-pharmacologically, which doesn't get much press by government or pharmacological, or therefore TV commercials or anything else. You now see TV commercials talking about, yeah, we can influence this cytokine, whatever. We can do it with zero side effects incredibly efficiently. All one has to do is be a little bit good at being able to do a literature search, which is kind of what I do all the time. Even though I am a clinician chiropractor, I spend a lot of my time preparing for my classes at the college and elsewhere. Last weekend, I did class with the incredible Trevor Berry. Dr. Berry is a chiropractic neurology diplomat, and we kind of split the presentation time. I did 7 hours and he did 7 hours. I think some of the reasons that's a fabulous class is because my background is orthopedics, his background is neurology. So the audience got an opportunity to look at these clinical applications from both a heavy orthopedic perspective versus a heavy or a neurological perspective, and kind of integrating them and amalgamating them into clinical protocols. In the 73 pages that I put together for you guys, I think that they are exceptionally good. It took me a really long time to put together these 73 pages, but just kind of looking at it, this is just bottom line. So I don't need to do much. I have less than 30 minutes. And by the way, at the end of my presentation, we will definitely take questions. But just to kind of look at this, what Steve Shanks kept saying is that the photochemistry only occurs in the visible spectrum. He did not show you the best study ever done on world history on that, but I have it. So you guys will see it ever so briefly, but I'll show it to you. I just want to make sure that all of us understand that when you go to the left of vision, meaning shorter wavelengths to the left, that there's so much energy, less than 400 nanometers, there's so much energy that it damages cells, it causes mutations. So we want to spend most of our lives not getting exposed to ultraviolet X-rays and gamma rays because it causes mutations. The photochemistry that has actually gotten Nobel Prizes that helps everything in physiology because it targets the mitochondria. And as Steve Shanks said, and I'll say it even a little bit more strongly, the biological epicenter of aging is the mitochondria. Mitochondrial physiology is the key to everything. To take all of these pharmacological products that damage the mitochondria, it makes it so that we are chasing our tails as healthcare providers with all that pharmacology. As getting ready for webinar today, me just sharing information with Steve Shanks, it's absolutely incredible that the United States of America spends $4 trillion per year in healthcare, mostly pharmacologically based healthcare, to come in last place in the developed world on health. In fact, if you look at the news at all, even though they try to put it on deeper into the publications, the United States of America, the life expectancy in our country has dropped every year since 2016. Now, that's a big deal. Of course, what rescued that bad news is COVID, because they, oh yeah, of course, COVID is killing people, therefore life expectancy will drop. But all countries in the world experience that drop of life expectancy with COVID. All countries in the world have gone right back up to original status, except for the United States of America. Something's wrong with a pharmacologically based healthcare delivery system. To come up with alternatives that are not pharmacologically based is really awesome. By the way, read Metabolical by Robert Lustig, pediatric endocrinologist from UC San Francisco. Read his book from 2021. Read the book last year by Harvard's John Abramson called Sickening. And he goes, problem with healthcare in America is we turned it over to pharmaceutical companies. Our applications, because they have the best PubMed index studies to support them, our indications are going to be violet, green, and red. With those three colors, we can do absolutely remarkable things. historically for more than a decade in my clinical practice, we were glued to the red. And that's because I would see whiplash studies say, hey, if you use a laser on whiplash, you can get them to heal better and quicker. And so I'm into that. It's then I started about in 2008 with the violet laser. So I'm doing a violet red combo. And that's because the violet is antimicrobial and it does things that are complementary to the red. We now know that violet activates complex number 1 and 2 of the electron transport chain. I didn't really like Steve Shanks' picture, so I'm gonna show you a better one. It's a better one in my presentation. What has kind of fallen in the cracks, though, up until this moment, actually until September of last year, is the green. What does the green do? And are there studies on green that are credible, that are PubMed index? That means it's from the National Library of Medicine of the United States of America. And so I've done lit searches on it, and I find just, whoa, how many people know that these things are out there? Well, I'm going to give you a perspective on it coming up. And then, of course, you get to longer wavelengths. And longer wavelengths, they are very controversial in that this is your, not only your infrared lasers, but it's your 5Gs and your 4G cellular communications. And if you ever want to get freaked out, read about Havana syndrome. I cut for our office for education a 34-minute DVD on Havana syndrome. And I'm telling you, it's one of the most spooky things ever. And it's using wavelengths that are longer than the visible spectrum. So it's pretty interesting to see all that stuff. I'm just going to show you a few things on the 3 in the visible that we got right here, the violet, the green, and the red. As I just roll through it, you kind of get it. And again, let's just go to below 400, like the 350. So it's a wavelength of 350 nanometers. Just so you know, it is mutagenic. Don't be doing. As Steve Shanks said over and over, we want photochemistry. Photochemistry is the visible spectrum. That's what we want. And you'll see why in just a moment. You're going to see why. The thermal things are what you get with the longer wavelengths. And I don't want to say that's good or bad. I'm going to kind of say it's bad, but I definitely want to say that it doesn't give you what you really want, which, as we will see in a moment, is photochemistry. Steve Shanks had some pretty good pictures of it, and mine are kind of the same. They read good, but kind of what he didn't go over. He actually said this, but he didn't have a decent picture on it. When you look at, this is the Niels Bohr model, and you can read about it in the book Chemistry for Dummies. And in Chemistry for Dummies, Niels Bohr, it got the 1922 Nobel Prize. And basically what it says is that if you expose atoms, this is an atom, to energy, it takes the electrons from where they are to a higher shell. And they say that enhances all of physiology. Now, if you use too much energy, you eject the electron. That's ionization. And that's what would happen if we were below 400 nanometers. What does this is the visible spectrum. What they realize is once you get outside of the visible spectrum, it doesn't have enough energy to raise the electrons to another shell. The measurement, and Steve Shanks did this, but maybe not as well as some of you need it. The units of the energy for the electron is called the electron volt. So that's the key. You need a certain quantity of electron volts in order to elevate to the next shell to change photochemistry. So I kind of wrote that up pretty good. The other thing is and you're going to see this just in a moment, is that light is more than just a photon with an electron with an electron volt. Light is measured in wavelengths, and it's just the crest of one to the crest of the other. The wavelength for things that we can see are 400, rounding 400 to 700 nanometers. If you're shorter than 400 or longer than 700, shorter than 400, longer than 700, the wavelengths are still there, but you just can't see them. The photochemistry requires visible wavelengths as we go through. And just looking at this, they start to realize, if you read that book, Chemistry for Dummies, a remarkable thing happens. And that is, if you shoot light at atoms, and you raise the electrons to a higher shell, how long does it stay there? Not long. And when it falls back down, there is a further release of energy, which is called fluorescence. You kind of see it over there on the right. And that creates yet another light exposure. So in other words, once you start it, it kind of spreads throughout the entire system. It's called the London dispersion effect. And it's in that book, Chemistry for Dummies, which I read. It's a pretty interesting read. The key concept, jump through. We kind of did all this. Steve Shanks kind of did all this. My eye is definitely to the clock. The electron volt is how we measure the energy of a single photon. And so I kind of typed it up so you can kind of get an idea. The London dispersion effects, the things that we kind of talked about. And I put a bunch of graphs. I just found them on the internet. And this is kind of what Steve Shanks was telling you, that the electron volt, so the energy associated with the red beam is 1.95 eV. That's electron volts. You see that right there. If you do green, which has more energy, it's up to 2.33 electron volts, so it's more. And if you go to the violet, it has over 3, just barely, electron volts. Infrared is below 4. Now, he said something which is a little bit different than my understanding, but I'll reiterate what he said, and then I'll show you what my understanding is. He says that in order to raise the electrons to the next shell, he says it requires 1.7 electron volts. That means the red is going to go over that threshold. Yet I think one of the articles I put says you need 1.8. So still 1.7, 1.8, no big deal. But part of what they look at is that there are definite light exposures that are longer. This is 830 nanometers, so you can't see it. That the electron volts, because as you get a longer wavelength, the electron volt drops off, isn't enough to move the electrons to the next shell. So you don't get the same physiological changes. What are the physiological changes? So Steve Shanks did these. So just doing, I'll show you the physiological changes coming right at you. And yeah, don't get too much vertigo as I'm doing this. Laser basics. This is what kind of everyone that using lasers takes for granted. Laser is monochromatic. Light is all the wavelengths. What laser technology does, it can eliminate all wavelengths but one. So that's called monochromatic, one wavelength. Now the other thing is that background light is scattered. It goes in all directions. What laser technology is done by a thing called a diode. What laser technology does, it takes all of the waveforms and brings them together. That's called coherence. Light emitting diodes are often monochromatic, but not coherent. So what Erchonia, the only company that is doing nonstop research and making applications to the Food and Drug Administration for clearance, they're up to 20 out of 24 laser clearances are all owned by Erchonia. What they figured out is that there's a big difference between monochromatic LED and monochromatic laser, that they use monochromatic LED. LED is light emitting diode for the placebo. So people can't tell the difference between the monochromatic, the coherent versus the not coherent LED, so they can use it perfectly as a placebo and still get incredible outcomes. And so just kind of mentioning that as we drop down a little bit, this is a really, really cool study, International Journal of Pharmacology, coming out in 2011. Just look at the title for a moment. An overview of laser principles, laser tissue interaction mechanisms, and laser safety precautions for use of medical laser users. And part of what I want you to see is everything I just said about coherence and monochromatic, but this is what kind of caught my eye, and so I underlined it in red. Wavelength is the most important determinant of how light affects tissues, wavelength. So this is why you can never have a laser with all the wavelengths, because that's just background light, but you can exploit the benefit of a single wavelength if you just eliminate everything else. Wavelength, so we started out with a red wavelength, then we started to use the red and the violet, which is the 405 nanometer wavelength. Now, because of what's coming on the literature, I'll show you the literature momentarily, that the green wavelength is taking center stage. And the result is there is now the availability of a green wavelength monochromatic laser that has FDA market clearance as of September of last year. So just kind of looking at this and some of the stuff it does. Again, Steve Shanks did this fairly well, and basically the fairly well is we are not into the photothermal, particularly since there is credible evidence of publications, including this publication we're looking at right now, that if you elevate temperature below 40 degrees centigrade, which is 104 degrees Fahrenheit, that you start to denature proteins in things. We therefore are not into the photothermal, we are into the photochemistry. Photochemistry is what we want, and my favorite line on that is in this article here. Coming out of Boston University and Harvard, I thought that this was some of the greatest technologies, one of the greatest articles ever written on the applications of low-level laser therapy. But my favorite line, which is what I have time for, is here. So it's on the second page of the article, so I'm going to blow it up just a little bit. Laser is not, so circle, not an ablative or thermal mechanism. So our lasers don't cut, they don't heat, there's no temperature. In fact, on our informed consent, which is second to none, we don't even put that there is the potential to be burned by our laser because it can't be burned. It's not that kind of laser. Laser is not an ablative or thermal mechanism, but rather a photochemical effect comparable to photosynthesis in plants whereby the light is absorbed and exerts a chemical change. What is that chemical change? A meaningful and, by the way, instantaneous increase in the production of adenosine triphosphate. So it's the whole ATP thing. ATP is used for everything. It's used for the pumps, it's used for healing, it's used for protein synthesis. If you can get more fuel in the tank, which is what laser does, everything starts to get better. The literature on this goes back, it has history, goes back to 1967. All the different applications, there are so many. What was pretty interesting though, as Steve Shanks sort of said, that all of the original laser stuff, they said red, 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 red. All they say was red. But then these guys, if you take a look at the next three studies that I very quickly just dropped into this presentation, they have the ability to mutate the genome of mice so that they don't make cytochrome C oxidase, which they know is the target of the red. And yet, when they used lasers, there was significant increase in the production of adenosine triphosphate. So right away, they start thinking, what the heck? Something else is going on here, something than just red. And so they start looking at this. And by the way, they also admit, even the COVID literature admits, that if you're going to use lasers, the therapeutic effect of blinking the light, pulsed mode, blinking the light, pulsed, is significantly superior to that of continuous wave. Erchonia's lasers are made that you can do the pulses. That is their claim to fame. Other than a line, so that every spot on that line is equivalent of a dot when you're using laser therapy. So it's really incredible. The fact that they can blink it, that's why people buy the Erchonia, because of the ability to blink the light. The best references on the blinks, this book here, if you become a laser person, buy this book, the Rife Handbook of Frequency Therapy for Holistic Health. Remember, Royal Rife out of USC. And then, of course, the chiropractic application of the Rife frequencies, the brand new book, 2023 by my friend Jerome Raruca, a chiropractor in Atlanta. If anybody's into this, contacting Dr. Raruca through Erchonia is probably a really good thing to do. All this stuff on quantum biology, just because me looking at the time. Take a look at this one here. This is page 30 of 73. And again, I am aware of our clock. I just want you to know, this is the article I used in my last PI court case. So in my PI court case, I used lasers. Why did you use lasers? I talked it up. They asked me if I have any articles. This is the one I presented. I got to do it in front of the jury. And pretty much it shows what laser does is that it is not hot, it is cold, and that it is used for healing, stimulation, and for pain reduction. Reduction of pain and accelerated healing by doing number 4. Number 4 is called cytochrome C oxidase. Classic red, we're going to up that. Again, mitochondria have their own DNA. This is the picture that I thought was really good. when you just take a look at this, this is the mitochondria. The number of mitochondria you have per cell is not a constant, it is a variable. That's why we do things like intermittent fast and high intensity interval training, because you get more mitochondria per cell. What historically they have known is that number 4 is influenced by red. And if you influence it appropriately, the result is an immediate and meaningful increase in ATP, while an immediate decrease in production of free radicals. What all of you need to do that are into this, take a look at this picture. This picture is key. Here it is. When number 3 is dysfunctional, you start to make excess of that guy. Now, you probably look at that guy and say, I've seen that guy in school. That's the superoxide free radical. Very dangerous. The prime is unstable. You can tell that by the O2, the little negative sign, means there's unpaired electrons in the outer shell. The problem with that guy is that that guy targets the mitochondrial DNA in order to get stable. So what it does, it mutates the mitochondrial DNA. That is what they call the death spiral. You begin to spin your life down. In a similar way, just switching colors for a second, number 1 also makes the superoxide free radical. The result is they start realizing if you can influence number 1 and number 3, all of a sudden everything starts to change. That's the value of the violet for number 1 and the green for number 3. And then what sweeps it all up, it makes it all work, is the red. So we're using combinations of these things. The terminology from my friend Trevor Barry from this weekend, he called it stacking. And he showed how he would use these different devices in order to get optimum clinical outcome. He's really into the clinical magic, and he likes to take videos of his so screwed up patients prior, including his examinations, etc., and then show what he's doing with the lasers, and then show the clinical outcomes immediately thereafter. I think you probably learned that from Dr. Ted Carrick when I took Dr. Ted Carrick's NeuroDip class. He did a lot of that videoing thing, but this is pretty fun. I think that the mitochondrial biological epicenter, some of my favorite mitochondrial references are so good. This book here, Mitochondrial Medicine, it clearly, chapter 22, clearly recommends violet, green, and red lasers. And this book came out in 2008. So it goes to show you some of the history of this. Pictures from there, the mitochondria is the whole thing, laser therapy. This is chapter 22 from the book on laser therapy. It reads really good. All of this has to do with the mitochondria. If you want to really understand about the mitochondria, there is no reference better on planet Earth than Ravenous by Sam Apple, because the mitochondria was discovered by Otto Warburg. That's a picture of Otto Warburg. This book is a miracle. If you ever read this book, it will completely blow you out of the water. Not because guess what this guy was doing? He's getting a Nobel Prize by identifying the electron transport proteins and showing that he can change their physiology by shining at them different waveforms of light. All of this stuff began not with him, because he credits Albert Einstein, who he knew. They were kind of doing stuff at the same time. They're alive at the same time. Remember, this is the guy that got the 1931 Nobel Prize. He should have got the 1926 Nobel Prize. Albert Einstein got the 1920 Nobel Prize. So you look at all these guys and the electron transport stuff, it reads really good. I'd also share with you that the greatest book I've ever read came out last year, Transformer by Nick Lane, a evolutionary biochemist. And again, guess what he says? He goes right back to the mitochondria and the work of Otto Warburg. All of this stuff is the basis for low-level laser therapy. I typed a bunch of it up. You see, once again, the electron transport, the same old stuff. Just because of time, I'm rolling through some of this stuff. This one had a lot in my brain as I'm getting close here. When you take a look at this, when researchers do the things, they have to make sure it's PubMed indexed. PubMed is the official website of the United States government for biomedical information. And when you look at medical journals, they have a pecking order. The #1 medical journal on the pecking order on planet Earth is Nature. So this shouldn't be lost on you that these are the top journals in the world. and they start looking at what is pretty important in chiropractic clinical practice, osteoarthritis. And they start looking at osteoarthritis. They have proven inadequacies of the function of mitochondrial electron transport complexes 1, 2, and 3. So this is violet and green. So they start realizing these are some of the reasons that only doing red for the rest of your life is good, but it is less than optimum. If you want to optimize, you're probably going to have to start getting into varying degrees in your clinical approaches, both a violet and a green, along with your red, just kind of running those guys down. Steve Shanks had this picture. I liked it. He kind of had this one too, how the violet gets number 1 and number 2. And there's always other variables, like you can see very obviously there, CoQ10. There's all kinds of other mitochondrial variables that we would use in our clinical approaches. And of course, why does chiropractic even work? I put down the mitochondrial supplements that work, the green. I put a whole bunch of studies on green, on how they work. Honestly, and just in the moments I have before I take some questions, those of you that are part of my life, because some of you are, and you know me well, and because I've been out there for 45 years now, and at a chiropractic college for 42 years. When some of the things that has happened to me is I'm Irish, I got Irish skin, I got Irish DNA, and I have Irish problems with excessive exposure to the sun, and I got a cancerous lesion on my left ear that they removed 2 days before Christmas of last year, so just over a month ago. And so I got a wound. It's a pretty bad wound, and they say, well, it's going to take 3 months to heal. If you guys look, it is completely healed. I put an article how you heal it with a green laser, and that green laser study I put here, and I have, as of just after my surgery, I got already my green laser. So I did it. It healed so remarkably. I was showing off my ear stuff to class this week, and it was in Palo Alto. But I put together a whole bunch of stuff on wound healing. But the real thing I did, just in the moment that I have with you, I want you to see, all of these are things to say, hey, I want a green. You're probably gonna say, I want a green. Even the lay press, like here it is, USA Today had been running a series on pain, and it talks about using light to treat pain. And they say the one that they found for best for pain was green. And they say they did these clinical studies, and they were supposed, the subjects were supposed to give back their green lights, but they say they refused to give them back. It helped them with their pain so much. And so just looking at the green stuff, the thing I thought was most interesting of all, and it'll probably be how I end with you, because I definitely want to take some questions if there are any. I'll look at the Q&A. I mean, all of this stuff reads really good. I'm just sorry I don't have enough time to do it with you, but I want you to look at this picture. It's brand new. And if you take a look at this one, what they've known forever, and in fact, if you ever see that book, as I'm standing up and being just ever so slightly rude to you all, if you ever read this book from one of my bookshelves, the Brain and Pain by Richard Ambrom from last year out of Columbia University, he says what we have all known forever. Pain control central is a spot in your brain stem called periaqueductal gray. The fact that we can activate that with a chiropractic adjustment is unbelievably relevant and crazy that most chiropractors don't know that, but it's been in the literature since November of 1996, was published in the Journal of Pain by a guy named Bill Vicenzino, that the periaqueductal gray drives the raphe magnet nucleus, resulting in descending inhibitory pathway for nociception. It's the most powerful pathway out there. And by the way, raphe magnet nucleus uses as its neurotransmitter serotonin. And in dopamine nation where we live, serotonin, we have 50 million rounded of our citizens that got to take drugs every day to raise their serotonin levels. We can do so much better. This is what controls pain. Periaqueductal gray drives the raphe magnet nucleus. That is an inhibitory sign. It inhibits nociception in the spinal cord. What they're now realizing is, I was very interested in watching neurology diplomat, brilliant beyond belief, Trevor Barry, how green light, if you use what he calls retinal applications, you're not looking into the green. That would be crazy, and steroids never do that. But he would roughly run it past the eyeball, activating a pathway that goes up and comes back down and activates the periaqueductal gray. That's why it's helping so many people with pain. And the same articles I just shared with you say that Every receptor that your eye can perceive is also perceived by receptors on your skin. They actually say that skin applications and eye applications both get incredible physiological benefit for people. Just kind of showing you this stuff and see if there's anything else. Again, green light, anti-nociceptive. I put so many cool articles in there. And again, you can have all of those if you want. HHS, Health and Human Services, brain photobiomodulation therapy. Again, they increasingly are looking at the different waveforms and what they can do. And pretty much the one that they say you got to be most careful of is anything over 850 nanometers will open the voltage-gated calcium ion channel. If calcium gets in, creates free radicals, and it starts to kill the neuron. Is problematic. What they're blessing is the greens, the blues, and the reds. The blues, we call our blues violet. Now, just making sure you guys know that's all in there. There's my contact information if anybody needs to talk to me, and therefore, in my moments remaining, I am more than willing to look at questions. And so I have to kind of go off to do that. It looks like I have a few. And so I will just kind of look at them and see if they're appropriate for this format or not. What does the green do that the violet cannot do? The green targets complex 3, the violet targets complex 1 and 2. Why not develop a laser with all 3 wavelengths? I believe it will probably happen one day. If you saw that one article that Steve Shanks showed you from the University of Illinois, they had all 3 in that study. And even it was a study on mesenchymal stem cells, but it was also a study on kidney fibrosis. So right now they are somewhat handcuffed by what the Food and Drug Administrations will allow them to do. So far, this is the best effort. I hope I said that fairly. Did I say that fairly, Steve?
Yeah, that's it. Just to get that green violet, that's a 4-year process. So we just can't make a laser and put it out there without a 510K from the FDA.
Joseph asked me another question. I think it's a good question. He says, and basically, when you do a controlled clinical trial, which you have to do to get FDA market clearance, that's what Erchonia is nonstop doing, is these clinical trials. And they use the LED for the placebo. Does the LED beat the controls, meaning beat no intervention? It does. It is better by about 10%, yet the laser is better by rounded minimum 60%. The result is, even though it's not fair to say LEDs don't work, but they don't work anywhere near as well as the laser, which is why Erchonia can get away, and the Food and Drug Administration will accept them using the lead as a placebo. Hope that was good for that question. Let me see what else is there.
Yeah, one quick thing on that is, so when we're doing pain clinical trials, there's a minimum threshold that you have to hit, which is a minimum of 30% pain reduction. We never saw that with LEDs. So what means we could never legally market it.
For pain,
For pain.
the LED. Yeah, got it. Thanks. That was good, informative. Stay with me. I got 2 more questions. It says, if you use a violet a bit longer, will it have the same effect as a green? No, they're completely different targets. And therefore, in fact, I do not advocate using the violet too long because it has a lot more energy. And if the more you understand about biology, the Arndt-Schultz law, everything that is good for you is bad for you if you overdo it. And there is the potential that too much of anything is negative. So I would not try to compensate for green with longer violet. I think that they are completely separate. And then Irene, who's a classmate of mine from Western states in the 70s, the London dispersion effect in more detail. Irene, I found that in a Chemistry for Dummies, and it basically says, as soon as you use light to raise electrons to a higher shell, as the electron falls back down, it creates its own light, and that raises other electrons up. And so resulting in, it spreads throughout the entire system, and that's called the London dispersion effect. When I took my original class on this from that solid state chemist all the way back in January of 2009, he went over the London dispersion effect. I was lucky that I understood him because I thought he went over pretty quick. I understood it because I read the book Chemistry for Dummies. So it's in the book Chemistry for Dummies. If I did a poor job on that, Chemistry for Dummies, And then my neurology buddy, Peter Schreier, has a question there. Where in the right book does it talk about pulse versus constant light? I don't know off the top of my brain, Peter. I don't know if you picked up that book. It's kind of a hard book to find, and it's about this thick, but it's in there. But even the COVID literature talks about how pulsed violet light will knock down COVID 40 to 100% better than continuous wave. So you kind of see that, but I don't know exactly where it was in the book by Royal Rive. I'd have to look it up, which is no time to do that at this in this format. How much is too much laser time for lasers? I use it up to 20 minutes. You're perfectly fine. You're perfectly fine as long as you remember, one of the ways that you can absolutely guarantee that you never exceed the hormetic threshold is to put the laser on a motor. And that's what Erchonia has done with their FX series, with the FX and the FX405. The laser is slowly rotating, and they cut the cam a little bit off, so it's not like it's drilling a hole in the middle. That as it moves, you just flood the systems and never exceed the hormetic threshold. 20 minutes in one spot, I don't do that. I never go that long, but you don't have to put the laser beam on a motor. The other alternative is get the patient to move. So I would watch Trevor Berry. He would have his lasers on a stand, and he would just get people to do things. He likes that neurological cerebella thing, which he calls no, where you put his thumb out in front of him, have people fixate on the thumb, and then keep looking at the thumb as they would rotate their head back and forth while lasing their head, neck, cerebellum. Because they are moving when they're doing this, you get far better outcomes. Therefore, I'm not negative. I don't think it's harmful to do 20 minutes. I wouldn't probably go more than that, but I think that you even get a better outcome if you either move the laser beam or you move the patient within the beam. And then one final question says, thank you and blessing to both of you. There might be something, Steve, in the chat. Those were the Q&A. I'm going to take a quick look at the chat. And it looks like the chat is pretty much the exact same stuff. It is, so as far as my ICs, let me think, patient gets a rash. I have a patient who gets a rash each time she receives an emerald laser session. I don't know, we've had it now for a month. We've used it nonstop. I have not experienced that. And consequently, it's more than my understanding. I will therefore perhaps turn that over to Steve Shanks, see if he has any insight on that. That's a lot of questions.
We've had green laser for the predecessor to the emerald since 2013. That has not really come up. I don't know if it has to do with maybe it's in a hypoxic state. A lot of times when you're I've heard before about when people get their first treatments or have their treatments. One of the first things that comes back is pain, so that you might be stimulating the nerve, which we kind of went over with the green laser is probably the best wavelength for that. But
Jennifer, if I could just add this in, remember the green targets number 3, which the technical name is cytochrome C reductase. ASE means it's an enzyme. All enzymes are proteins. All proteins come from the DNA. It could be something genetically or epigenetically unique to the individual. I always say adapt to the uniqueness of the individual. If there's an outlier who's getting that, I would just simply not do that or do it for less time. I would probably dial my time back an awful lot to see if there's a threshold. If I stayed below that I could still get the benefit without having the rash. But I always am respectful to the genetics and the epigenetic uniqueness of individuals. And I would just say, nothing is for everyone, and you might have an outlier. We haven't seen it yet. And like I say, we've used it all day long, every day now for just about a month on a whole variety of different clinical symptoms. And that hasn't come up yet. That doesn't mean that it won't, but it hasn't come up yet. I hope that was helpful. Steve, do you have anything else to add to that, or we are
I
good?
sure don't, Dan. Thank you very much.
Hey, somebody says you want to copy my notes. Adriana, I haven't sent them up yet. That's because it's on me, just busy. But that's because I don't do anything. All of you that know my life know that Michelle does everything. But Michelle is also full-time clinical chiropractor, and she's just knocking down the bods right now. We will get it up to Adriana, and you are welcome to have it. And it's 73 pages, because a lot of it I had to go through pretty quick because Steve Shanks talked way too long. He told me 10 minutes, you went 20 minutes. I go, oh, okay, no problem. You guys look at the thing I put together. It's really good. Anything else, Steve?
No, that's it.
Okay, thanks everyone for listening, and for all of my friends who are on. I'm glad to, hear from all of you. And Steve is okay. Then can I end Zoom?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Thanks.